Off. I think right away we should just hop right into the topic of the day, the tariffs.
Yeah, that works for me.
So, just kind of give a vocal rundown of your deliberation earlier that we posted on Instagram.
Yeah, so uh, let's have economics lesson 101. All right. For those of you who don't understand how tariffs work, it is a tax placed on imported goods. So for the last how many decades we've shipped our manufacturing overseas, so we don't make anything in the United States anymore. So think about like a simple object that you use, you buy, you see every day in the store that it's not extravagant by any means. It could be food, it could be clothes, it could be medicine. We're going to use t-shirts in this exercise. Okay. A United States corporation can produce a t-shirt for the sake of conversation, so the math makes sense. They can produce a t-shirt in China for $20. By the time that shirt is made, shipped, processed through customs, and is at the store, they're going to sell that shirt for $40 because they got to pay for shipping costs, they got to pay for staff, employees, other fees at the border. Then they got to make a profit, right? With Trump's tariffs, right? If we use the 25 number that he used all throughout the campaign, and it's well below the average tariff that he's put on all across the board. The average tariff, 25%. A 25% tariff on a $20 t-shirt at the point of entry, that's a $5 tax, right? In any measure of the American economy or of capitalism, when has the entrepreneur, the corporation, or the business eaten a cost, absorbed a cost at the expense of the consumer? Never, right? So that $5 tax is going to be passed down to the consumer. That corporation, that business, is now going to sell that $40 t-shirt for $45, right? They may even upsell it more, for they've got more, issues to deal with. They've got more on their plate. So now the value, the work done to bring that good to point of sale has increased. So they may be more than $45, right? But Republicans or Trump's argument is that tariffs are going to incentivize American production, and we're going to see a boom of American production and American made goods. Well, that sounds all fine and dandy if you don't understand economics. I'm not even saying international trade or domestic trade, or even just how production works, right? Because American corporations, they've been experiencing low demand because those same American corporations, in search of cheaper operating costs, move the manufacturing jobs overseas, right? So the American production does not have the capabilities to meet consumer demands in the United States. So basic supply and demand tells us that an increase in demand with a low supply will exponentially spike the price of any good. This could be bread, t-shirt, cars, homes, medicine, you name it, right? Well, let's give American corporations a year or two, to get their means of production streamlined so that way they can meet the demand. Well, now their operating cost has increased. American corporations are not used to producing goods here, right? So not only that, tariffs are across the board. So construction costs are higher. Labor is more expensive because he's deporting all of our construction workers, right? So the operating cost associated to increasing production in the United States is going to inflate the cost of any American good, right? Ford, they may have just announced that they're offering discounts to the consumers that they normally offer to their employees, right? That's a short-term goal for them to increase their sales, right, and trying to take advantage of a bad situation, but they can't sustain that, right? If Ford and GM are the only car manufacturers in the United States, right? They got to hire people, they got to build factories, they got to get steel and other products and resources to make it here that are also going to be taxed because of the tariffs. So any way you look at it, you're going to be paying an extra cost because of these tariffs, whether you're paying the tariff because you're buying an imported good, or you're paying an inflation or an inflated cost of an American-made product because American companies do not have the means of production to produce and produce a good at a value that is affordable for the American consumer.
Right. No, I agree 100%. You put that well. I have a couple of things. First of all, they're also like you can't expect the jobs to come back because you mentioned how the operating cost, and that's why a lot of businesses are leaving, and that's true, but they're also leaving because you start a business or you have your manufacturing in China, you're facing so many less like regulations for work, and that
Mm-hmm.
makes your operating cost immensely lower, and it just
Mm-hmm.
makes it easier to run a company when you can treat your employees like shit.
Right.
So, and do you really think Trump is going to make it better, when it comes to regulations that businesses are going to overlook that aspect of it
Mm-hmm.
just for a little economic gain? I don't see that.
Right.
And then another thing is he says that the tariffs are to correct the budget, to flatten the budget. First of all, who's the worst debt president in the history of the United States? Who's the person who has put America in the most debt out of any person ever?
I can tell you who it's
No,
not.
no, I can tell you who it is. It's Donald Trump. He's a Republican, he's a conservative, and he just blew out Biden by miles when it comes to debt. And the second part of that is just tax the rich.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to fix the budget, sure. I mean, me and you I feel like we're pretty cool with that. It's like there's very approachable, efficient ways to balance the budget, but it's not this. Don't pass it to the consumer. Put the burden on the rich who have already just been coasting.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, I think it's. I mean, you and I, we've got our opinions, and we've about Donald Trump and his administration and all the things he's going to do. But for somebody who doesn't, who keeps their head in the sand and doesn't really pay attention or never read a book or learned these pretty elementary um, these pretty elementary ideas of how our world works, and they look at Mr. Trump and they think that he knows how to balance a budget. He's been bankrupt 6 fucking times. What you go bankrupt once, maybe that's just bad luck.
Right.
Maybe that's you know just the situation, just part of the times that you're in. You go bankrupt 6 times. And not only that, you're
Takes
bankrupting a
talent.
casino. Like, how
Yeah.
bad of a businessman do you have to be?
Yeah.
And then
Casinos
to
are free
think that,
money.
right, and then to think that you're going to give him the keys to the United States economy.
Yeah. The
It's
biggest
it's
economy in
almost
the
like,
world.
yeah, yeah, no, but then also like what you talked about, earlier is like talking about, um, like the jobs kind of coming back,
Right.
and I think that there's a lot of his supporters that they genuinely felt like that if American production came back, that they were going to once have those factory jobs that paid a livable wage, that provided
Right.
good benefits, so you could send your kids to college, so you could afford to buy a car or buy a house, go to
Right.
vacation and build up a savings plan, right? So, I mean, the next thing that I'm about to say is directed at those people. What makes you think that Jeff Bezos, who 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 owns and operates Amazon and these Amazon warehouses, right? And look at the Amazon workers that are trying to unionize and get livable wages and to get pay time off and get sick leave so they can take care of their kids and their aging parents. right? Or trying to get benefits like health insurance, right? Or look at Elon Musk's Tesla factory down in Texas, right? You really think you really think that Trump's buddies, right? These guys are going to bring back American manufacturing. What makes you think that that's even an offer on the table for you? It's not.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, he literally, the Consumer Protection Agency gone, Labor Protection Agency's gone,
Mm-hmm.
watchdogs who are government watchdogs who are there to protect
Mm-hmm.
labor gone.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think the like bringing jobs back to America at this point would bring that kind of boom? You have to think logistically here and realistically.
Mm-hmm.
We're gaining off of free trade. We are, and I think the net positive of free trade is greater than that of what he's trying to do with the tariffs.
No, yeah, he thinks that he can manipulate the free trade market and that they can just bend the knee to his will. But I mean, you know better than anybody. What is Bernie Sanders or what has he been saying on his Stop the Oligarchy tour across America? He says that 99% is a hell of a lot more than 1%, right?
Mm,
And you extend that out across the world. I mean, maybe Trump is a genius because by golly, he was able to get the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese to join sides and to create an alliance saying that they would band together and retaliate against American economic aggression, right? The whole world is against us right now. He has severed us and we are on an
yeah,
island.
yeah.
And I don't care if you're Germany, I don't care if you're South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, China. Being on an island by yourself, you cannot survive.
Nope.
Our global world exists in a state of globalization, and removing ourselves from that stage and burning those bridges will severely impact future American generations to come. And
Right.
and that's the gravity of the situation.
People don't realize how that actually affects their lives, whether it's economically, militarily. I mean, if we isolate ourselves, we're gonna, oh, it's just like, where do you even start?
Right.
Everything's gonna I mean, we can't win a war against China. Like NATO is the reason we've been secure for so long. Why there hasn't
Mhm.
been a world war since World War II because of
Mhm.
NATO. And to just throw that out and say, let's gamble with lives, literal millions of lives. Let's gamble with that just because NATO's not perfect, I guess is their reasoning. Maybe we put too much money into NATO, but it's like, I mean, you're gonna get what you're asking for here. And then economically, like you said, we're already seeing China team up with South Korea and Japan. Just that shows you, it won't take a lot for other countries to push their bullshit aside to combat our bullshit. We can't just do this. We can't just walk over other countries and expect our isolated manpower and just brain power at all can triumph their
Mhm.
combined because guess what? Contrary to what they push, China is really advanced and they do a lot of stuff better than us. And
Mhm.
it's like that's already a great, I wouldn't say they're an enemy at all, but they're definitely an adversary at the moment. And you got to think like a realist in these times.
No, for sure. I mean, I don't say this literally, but I do mean it in that the world that we exist in is a game, and there are winners and there are losers. And we've been the bank, we've been the police force, we've been setting that standard across the world. and with that, we've weakened our position as a country to continue to maintain that status quo. I mean, that's the most baffling part of it. Forget crashing the United States economy. Forget, you know, all the other crazy stuff that he's doing to the Constitution and to our institutions and to our government. It's what is our place on the global stage going to be after this? Like global conflict is coming, right? Global economic crisis is coming, right? And that's the perfect storm. That's the perfect recipe for global conflict. We can't, like, there's no means of protection. There's our the civil division. Like, I just don't understand the motive in the MO, because none of it adds up. It's just I don't it's baffling, baffling.
Right. And I mean, that just ties into another topic. We have the perfect opportunity to avoid a global conflict by, protecting the sovereignty of Ukraine. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think if we do that, not only do we stop Russia from invading Poland and triggering Article 5 of NATO, we also avoid China invading Taiwan. I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
might be a lost cause with Donald Trump, but at the same time, I mean, we really have a good, and that's why we got to realize it's deeper than the topics we're discussing. The deeper aspect of this is Donald Trump's not a critical thinker. He's not a strategy person. He's kind of just a on the fly. If you ever read The Art of the Deal, his book, he says, I don't plan my day. My day comes to me. And that's just like that's a that's a big red flag right there. It just shows you that when it comes to something like Ukraine and the strategic appeal, and we've talked about the strategic, the human rights, the sovereignty appeals of supporting Ukraine. We've gone over that. If he can't, he doesn't look at that because he looks at, okay, Putin's appeasement and getting out of NATO, getting out of the UN to kind of play this game you're talking about. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
when two things. One, when are people going to realize that Trump is not for the average person and he's just in the game and in the swamp as everybody else? And two, when will Democrats be able to message that? And it seems like they're doing a little better recently. Cory Booker's thing was really good, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's going to take the Democrats, one, being able to push that message, and two, separating themselves, because guess what? Their nose ain't clean either.
Right. Right. I think one is that the Democratic Party, not necessarily like Democrats in the sense of like the voters, right, or people who call themselves Democrats, but the party itself. I think that I think it was evident during. I think you could see elements of it in Kamala's campaign, where they weren't making really any effort to speak directly to your blue collar workers. And I think that when we talk about the working class, we have to recognize the unskilled workers, the blue collar skilled workers, and then the white collar skilled workers. And the Democratic Party, they've been catering towards that college educated base. So I think there are real sentiments with Trump supporters that own the libs is not owning the libs. I think it's that they are perfectly happy seeing the world deteriorate and crash and burn, because it's retribution for them, because they feel like they've been left behind. Because the Democrats, Bill Clinton with NAFTA, they they were seen as the party to kind of turn their back on that working class, on that middle class. And so I think that if the Democrats are serious about winning and winning big, and embracing a progressive movement of the likes we've never seen in this country, is that Democrats are going to have to they're going to have to come out with a firm obvious, clearly identifiable platform that doesn't cater towards the college educated people, and that they have to embrace and recognize that they have to bring in people into their party that are racist, that are homophobic, that are xenophobic, that are transphobic, right? They have to be okay with that because unfortunately in America, Americans are not, Americans, we have a really dark and twisted history, and that will follow us forever. And that there are people in this country who will cling on to that and will keep that fire alive. And to just ignore it and push it off to the side is not the proper way to deal with it. And so I don't think we need to sacrifice or give up the fights for civil rights and for equality and for unity. But unity means is that you've got to find a way to agree with the racists.
Yeah.
And that's but is the Democratic Party up to that challenge? And I just don't know if they're up for that challenge.
Well, I feel like maybe the best way to do that is to celebrate and push for economic prosperity and getting the middle and lower classes lifted. That's
Right.
the Democrats used to be more about that, and when we look at the 2016 and 2020 election cycles, especially in states like Michigan, Ohio, and former production states,
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing states, in the Democratic primaries, you had insane turnouts, but it wasn't because Democrats were doing good at voting. It was because non or low prosperity voters who don't vote a lot or uneducated voters, labor workers were coming out and voting for Bernie, and they were independent or just left leaning but don't vote a lot. And that was a perfect opportunity to use
Mm-hmm.
that and to transform the Democratic Party into one that is progressive in
Mm-hmm.
nature, but also pushes for populist things like economic gain
Mm-hmm.
and patriotism.
Right.
And it's just I think they're gonna have to have another coming to God moment, but actually come to God this time.
You know, from from the ashes that the phoenix rises again, and I think that clearly, obviously, the Republican Party is no more, and that they have embraced MAGA. And the Democratic Party, they have no image. The only image they had was Obama, and then since then, they've been trying to find an image. It's been a decade, right? It's been almost a decade of no image, no direction for the party. And you're 100% right, Carter. Is that if the Democratic Party were to embrace a populist, progressive agenda like what Bernie did, it would have been successful. And the Democratic Party, they've got to be okay with, and they've got to trust in the grassroots movement and stop, stop taking money from the big donors, from the billionaires. You know, that's it's the same. It's no different. I mean, it's different, but it's no different than the Republicans taking money from Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. It's the same thing. And I think that until that the Democratic Party is okay with not receiving those big money donors and those PAC donations, I think that'll be the day that the Democratic Party really can really make leaps and strides.
Right, right. And yeah, that's a really good point. And Bernie pointed that out in the primary. And to the dismay of the Democrats, they paid the price for that, I think, because guess what? Bernie's right. I mean, he's not just out there speaking. He has truth to what he's saying, and he's just one of the few people who are proud enough and able enough, I guess, to say it because he's not bought out.
Right.
And when the Democrats are being bought out, you can't really use the attacking on Musk and super PACs and claiming we're the party for the average American when we're doing this.
Right. Yeah, the Democratic Party is lying through their teeth when they say that they are the party for the people. They are not. They are not. And anybody who preaches that and endorses that and carries that message, um, you're blind and you're a sheeple, no different than Trump supporters and their blind obedience to their king and their Messiah. And I think that's the internal reflection that Democrats need to have. Is that, are they following the Democratic Party and Democratic leaders because they're Democrat, or are they following them because what they say and what they do and how they act reflects, you know, how they want the party to rule and to legislate, and in our government,
Right,
and holding ourselves to a higher standard,
right.
holding
Because
our
at that
elected
point,
officials to
you're
a higher standard.
right. I mean, you're just when you're doing that, you're becoming a confirmation bias, you know, victim. And guess what? That's the same thing. That's the same reason MAGA exists.
Hmm.
And one, you don't get what you want out of your party, i.e., the Biden presidency, or two, you lose elections because your party is shit and you're
Hmm.
not holding them to a higher standard.
Hmm.
It was in the Democrats won big in 2020 because that's when Democrats were the most and left-leaning people in the country were pissed off and they were influencing the party, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better than what we saw in 24.
Hmm.
And the only way to activate your voters, I guess, yeah, you're going to get a lot of that just out of Trump destroying the country, but you also have to stand for things that connect with people, like you said, that maybe aren't socially liberal.
Right.
But guess what? We're in America, and while liberalism and things like taxing the rich more and taxing businesses more, that's super popular. They're the Biden administration's push for such drastic measures when it comes to social issues only fueled the Republican Party and distanced the Democratic
Hmm.
Party from middle ground voters, independents, low prosperity voters who you love or hate Trump, he's good at picking those up, and you have to be on your shit to get them, or at least compete
Hmm.
in them.
Hmm.
Trump's going to win those voters. It's more or less just you got to get the margin down.
Right. Right.
And that's what
Right.
Biden did in 2020, right? Because you look at independents, you look at people in those states that we talk about. Now, he didn't run up a huge win like Obama did in 2008, but he won a good chunk of those voters. They weren't completely on board, but I think that just proves for a good outlet of like we're talking about, the new lane for the Democrats.
Right. Right. And I myself am extremely critical of Trump supporters and Trump himself, but I do feel like it's important to give credit when credit is due. And I was watching a video earlier, put out by Andrew Five, or Channel Five. I apologize. And Andrew, he was interviewing a Trump supporter, a lady, and was asking her about her opinions on the economy and why she chose to support Trump, and then asking her about, well, Biden left the greatest economy ever in American, ever, left a really healthy economy and announcing the shitter. And I'm going to summarize here, but the gist of what she was saying is like, well, they're lying. How can they say that the stock market's really good, that employment's historically down, the the Nasdaq, the S&P 500, this, that, or the other, GDP, all these measures of a good and healthy economy are up, but why is it that my pocket is still hurting? Why is it that I have less money now than I did before 2016? Or before COVID, right? And yes, you and I know that. Well, that wasn't entirely Joe Biden's or the Democrats Party's fault because of COVID and all these other global things. But I think that those are real questions that Democrats need to hear and listen to. That they're not supporting Trump just because those people themselves are mean and malicious and vile people. They're everyday people that just want to live a simple life and just want to have money in their pocket to spend it the way they want to spend it, and they don't want somebody breathing down their neck trying to tell them how to live their lives, right? And when you think of it and put it that way as a Democrat, I think a lot of Democrats and a lot of liberals would agree with that sentiment. They just want to live their life the way they want to live it with nobody breathing down their neck, right? And it's like that's going to be the most important part, and that's going to be the critical factor going forward, not just for Democrats, but for independents and for leftists and for liberals and centrists, right? Is that we've got to start thinking about what do we have in common? What are we trying to get? What is our end goal? I don't care, if a trans person is able to use my bathroom or not, just like a MAGA supporter, really doesn't care. It, but it's, but it's the entertainment aspect of it, and the social media, and the arguments with your family, and the quick little snippets on cable television. That's what people care about. That's why people are so hooked on these issues, you know. And I think that's just, as Americans, like, we just need to take a step back and realize that, like, why are we fighting each other in this when it's like the system is intentionally designed, like the economy is not designed to work for the middle class, right? So when Joe Biden left office and had a really good, healthy economy, that's good for the health of the nation. That's good for the national security of the nation, but that's not good for the average American if they're still hurting. And I think to disregard that or to ignore that, I mean, is just utterly naive from Democrats.
Right. And the change that's needed to make it an economy that works for the lower and middle class is a liberal principle. Because
Hmm.
Nolan, you tell me, since 2000, let's say 2005,
Hmm.
where which aspect of which group of the economy has just soared and taken over so much percentage, over doubled their control of the overall wealth of the country? The top
It
1%.
it's the top 1%. Yeah.
Exactly. And the problem is, remember, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the economy used to work for the middle class, at least way better than it does now. And it's not only that, it's also because of things like Social Security and obviously Reagan changed the
Hmm.
playbook for a lot of that and kind of turned it out of what it was. But I think the point is, it's one, a liberal philosophy that you shouldn't mind pushing, because guess what? That's what a Democrat practically is.
Hmm.
And two, it's something that, like we're talking about, these switch voters, these low prosperity voters who are voting for Trump, they're on board with that shit too. And
Hmm.
like and a lot of them hate Elon Musk. A lot of Trump supporters don't like Elon Musk. And that's just a perfect example
Hmm.
of why. And guess what? That's a big reason the Democrats won Wisconsin, not by three, not by five, but by 10 points, by almost
Hmm.
300,000 votes.
Right.
And that's proof right in your fucking hands that this messaging would work. Making it a more
Hmm.
balanced economy that works for the lower and middle classes,
Hmm.
and that would unite the country, right? I mean, at least
Hmm.
somewhat. I know maybe if a progressive president was in place, that the Joe Random in rural America, he might not be 100% on board with all the progressive things when it comes to social issues. But guess what? If his money is up, he
Hmm.
doesn't like he's willing to not give a fuck. Because
Right.
like we talked about, people want two things in life: freedom and money.
Right.
If you give them that, you're on a good plane.
Right. Right. No, I mean, 100%. It's how do we level the playing field? Not level the playing field in terms of, you know, I hate to say this, but like DEI, right? But you level the playing field in the sense that it's like, all right, let me put it this way. With the Civil Rights Act, it became illegal to discriminate by race, gender, age, creed, so on and so forth. But what can you discriminate on? You can discriminate on class, and you can discriminate on income. And the rich and the 1% have figured out a way to message that, like the trickle down economics, right? And I think that's the re-education aspect of it, because like you said, there are a lot of Trump supporters who hate the man, and a lot of reasons why they voted for Trump. I don't understand why, because he is the man, was because he wanted to drain the swamp. He wanted to fix things in Washington, right? He promised change, he promised reform. Well, we're getting the change and we're getting the reform, but they're now waking up and they're now realizing that they've been deceived, right? And that what they were voting for wasn't what they thought they were voting for. And you're 100% correct that the results in Wisconsin is the proof in the pudding that get back to the working people. And I think that a lot of Americans, if they were to see it in practice and to see it work for them and give it some time to do its thing, that if we were to have a progressive Democrat like AOC or like Bernie Sanders and have 2 full terms, that the United States would turn its back on this neoliberalism, conservatism, just just putting corporatism, at the end all be all, and then finally getting back to the people.
Right.
And I think we just need to remember our roots, we the people, and it's what it all boils down to.
Right. And I mean, that just ties right back into Super PAC too. Because I mean, you can't serve two masters. I feel like that's a pretty big thing in politics. You can either serve your constituents, your voters, your people, or you can serve the donors.
Hmm.
Because if you're putting your priorities on, I need that, 2 mil from oil CEO John, you're gonna prioritize him over your people.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's just once again proof in the pudding that that's an immense, that's a drastic step, sure, but it's effective and it would be powerful towards the
Hmm.
goal we're speaking about.
Most
And
definitely.
I think it's pretty clear that guess what? Money helps in elections, but money doesn't win elections. Who has had all the money in the last 4 elections? Democrats. Democrats always have enough money. But
Hmm.
guess what? At some point, the money's just kind of money. And
Hmm.
and the valuable messaging and results that show up in people's bank accounts and their 401ks, that's gonna do way more than any fucking TV ad, radio ad can do.
Right. Right.
Because it's actually a real life something substantial that people can notice. Whenever they see I'm Kamala Harris and I approve this message, they just think, oh, here's a liberal, propaganding. It's like you gotta realize that real life effects are way more drastic when it comes to an election than ads.
Yeah. No. Yeah. 100%. I mean, like we learned this in school, that like ads are just there just because they have to spend the money, and it makes the politicians, it makes the candidate feel like they're making an impact. But really, I mean, in really rare occasions does it ever really sway voters' opinions. Especially when you get that, within a week or two of election day. Um, and like again, like it all comes back down to the grassroots movement. You know what I mean? Like knock on people's doors. You know, go to town halls, go to the diner, go to the VFW, go to the Union Hall, go to the schools, go to the parks, churches, you know, car shows. Go where the people are, listen to what they have to say. What are their struggles? Where are they hurting? What do they need? What are their needs? What are their wants? Well, like what do they see for the future, right? And I think that, and I don't even think you have to be a Democrat, independent, Republican. I think if you're just a good, decent person who's willing to extend, open arms, extend that olive branch to somebody who wouldn't normally have a seat at the table, and make sure that their voices and that their concerns were heard. That's, at the end of the day, that's what's going to win elections. Who cares about the theatrics? Who cares if you've got millions of dollars and fly around on a jet or drive a nice fancy bus. You know, I think I think if the people can see right through that bullshit, they can see through the facade, and I think that's why a lot of people have become so disengaged, right? That like we think back to like the boomers and the silent generation, how they were so active and so involved, is because there was an authenticity to it. There's nothing authentic about the campaign process anymore.
Right.
And I think if politicians and candidates, and people who really want to do the job for the good of the people, you know, fuck everything else, man. Go do that shit. You know,
Well, yeah,
that's how you're gonna find success.
100%. And I also think like flying around in jets and the nice buses like you talk about only makes you more a
Mm-hmm.
corporatist and push that narrative. It makes
Mm-hmm.
you even less because guess what? When I'm looking at a candidate who's flying in a jet, I don't fly in a jet. I don't get to do that stuff, so I'm not going to connect with that person. But
Right.
when a candidate's out there shaking hands, kissing babies, hearing people's questions, I can relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me like, okay, this person's a real life person who can do things for me, who can make my life better. And I think that was exemplified well by Cory Booker because he got up there and he didn't just say, oh, Trump bad. One, he got into every individual aspect of it, and he just sat up there and read letters from his constituents
Mm-hmm.
and he made them heard on the biggest stage there is in politics.
Mm-hmm.
And just a little, but like we said, that wasn't a post on social media, that wasn't an ad buy, that wasn't him flying on a jet, that was him just like the old days, rolling up your sleeves and going and getting in some trouble. Like
Yeah.
that's what the Democratic Party used to be known for. Now we're just a bunch of corporatists, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like, what if you want to go down that lane, you got to realize there aren't as many college educated voters as you realize, and I don't know if it's bad electoral math or they just love super PACs. I think it's a little bit of both, but you got to ditch that.
Right. I think the voting population and their willingness to try out this MAGA experiment, I think shows and exemplifies to the rest of the world and to future generations to come that public education is needed for democracy. And when it's defunded, when it's when it's put to the back burner, and when it's treated with disrespect and no dignity or honor, this is the results that come. You know, like like us starting out today's conversation explaining supply and demand shouldn't be a conversation that American voters should be having. You know, trying to explain the importance of NATO and the significance of not allowing a Russian regime to rise to global power. You know, we shouldn't be having those conversations. We shouldn't have to be explaining it. We should be, talking about the implications and the consequences and how do we chart a new way forward? How do we get through it? That's where debate is had. We can't be having conversations and debate if people are just utterly uneducated. And I'm not saying that to berate or to belittle those individuals because it's not their fault that the education system failed them. But the ignorance to say or to believe that it did not, and to think that they are educated, and to think that their opinions are fact, you know, that's the biggest issue of this all. And I think that's one thing that really needs to be addressed once we come out of this, is how are we going to educate the American public going forward, and how are we going to make that, something that can never be attacked or restricted for future American generations.
Right. No, I mean, I agree. I agree. I think it's almost like, I don't know. I saw someone today saying like, Since we made the Department of Education, and after that is when you saw the education decline in this country. And what I have to say about that is, okay, if I go buy new tires for my car and 2 weeks later my car, shits out, is that the tire's fault? Does causation always mean, or does correlation always mean causation?
Hmm.
And let's dive into the actual issue and what has been going on. Why education has its downfall, because it has. If you're not, if you can't accept that, I don't know what to tell you.
Hmm.
The problem is the funding, and the less college graduates who can teach. So you're seeing less funding and a lighter workforce. And guess what? You don't pay your teachers. You're not going to get a lot of teachers, because someone with a college degree, I mean, me and you have both been to college. People
Hmm.
in college expect to make money.
Hmm. It's an
It's a big
investment for their
reason why they're
future.
at college. Right. It's a big reason you're at college. And a lot of people come out of college with debt that they have to pay off. So
Hmm.
it's like not even an option for a lot of people to teach.
Hmm.
And so and you got to make it clear to voters that we're on board with improving the education system. It is shitty right now, but let's use money more efficiently, like they want to apparently. But even though it's the Department of Non-efficiency,
Hmm.
I mean, we're firing people who are in charge of nuclear bombs and things
Right.
like that, and then begging for them to come back. But anyways,
Right.
I mean, you gotta make it clear that we want to address this issue and we want to do it in the right way.
Hmm. It,
But you got to figure out how to make it like clear to them that ending the Department of Education is completely not gonna do that. It's not gonna help a thing. It's gonna hurt. I mean,
right.
I made a quick talk about it, so listen to that.
No, yeah. No, you're 100% correct. Yeah. Uh, I do want to pose a question to you before our hour is up.
Okay.
Is what's some good trouble we can cause? I that's something that's really been sitting on my mind and my heart recently. Is how Senator Cory Booker ended his record-breaking filibuster. Is let's have some good trouble. And I think he's 100% right. But also, it's like how like where even to start? Because I understand why, but it's like I don't want to go out burning Teslas.
Right.
It's like
No,
if
that's
it's like if
not
I'm
right.
gonna
That's not well. No, and that's not good trouble. That's
no, that's
bad
not good
trouble.
trouble. You know what I mean? Like that's bad trouble.
That's bad
It's
trouble.
like and I can write and I can post and I can share all I want, but that's not trouble either. And so it's like
Right.
when you heard those words from Senator Booker,
Right.
you know, how does that inspire you?
Well, first of all, I live in Topeka, Kansas, and we have a predominant, um, or not predominant, prominent church around our area that protest in far right theories and far right, ideals, and they go out on our university campus and protest. Next time I see them, I'm going out there and holding a sign,
Hmm.
and I'm gonna, and just showing that we can't just be walked on. Yeah,
Hmm.
so I think about that, and I also think about just how I spend my everyday, how I treat people, because if I guess it's not good trouble, but it's an impact, because if we're doing the same things, if we're like settling to anger and going to anger instead of reason, we're just becoming the thing we're calling out.
Hmm.
And by exemplifying that further and actually doing it, because guess what? A lot of people don't do that, A lot of
Hmm.
people can't go their day without complaining about something, for instance,
Hmm.
or griping about something. But you do that, you're exemplifying that. I don't know how to put it. I guess the product we're pushing is legit.
Right.
And and it might not sound like that would do a lot of work, but I mean, I think it does. And like I was talking about protesting, like guess what? I mean, I don't know what's going to happen because those are some wild people, but you know, like I'm willing to get handcuffed or I'm not going to hurt anybody. I'm not going to break a law that I think is, yeah, you know, but I guess even protesting without a permit is like, you know, that's what they threw MLK in jail for. So
Mm-hmm.
protesting, go to town halls. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
go make your voice heard. Like, I mean, my senators back home, they're too scared to have town halls right now. But guess what? All the voters are pushing for it, and it's got to be on their mind, you know, when they're
Mm-hmm.
getting tens of thousands of emails, show up, ask our questions, stop being a P word, you know, like
Yeah.
that and the only way you can influence government is to make your voice heard. And not only can you make that heard through your vote, but you know, these people have emails, they have phone numbers, they have staff that you can talk to. And while your voice itself might not make a change, guess what? Your vote doesn't make a change either. But our collective vote, our collective voice, our
Mm-hmm.
collective protest, our collective, you know, standing on business, I guess is what they say. But you know, doing that just exemplifies America, I feel like, and that's a good step.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more.
But all right, so let me hit you with the question real quick.
How did how did Senator Booker inspire me?
Yeah. Well, though that,
I
and
think he
also
just
I want to hear like what you like most about the speech itself.
what I liked most about the speech is that like you could see, you know, like I didn't watch, all 25 consecutive hours, but I would check in
Right.
every couple of minutes and I'd watch for
Yeah. So
15,
same.
30 minutes.
You
And
know,
like and
listen.
the way that you could see that not only standing there for as long as he did and talking for as long as he did, the physical toll it took on his body, but you could still see that regardless of that, he was pushing through and to show the emotion that his constituents were feeling and to show that his own conviction that he truly felt that this is morally wrong and that you know he may not have the power as an individual to change, but he understands that to do nothing in dark times like these is just as evil and awful as those of the oppressor. And I think that is what spoke to me the most. And that's what's inspiring me is that, sometimes I get overwhelmed and I think that because my situation is a little bit different than yours, Carter, where you're on a college campus and you've got community and you've got support system around you. Where I've recent college graduate, I had to move out of state to get a job or for my job, I should say. And so it does feel overwhelming when it's like I want to go protest on the sidewalk. I want to you know go make good trouble at my city council meeting or town halls. But in order to preserve my job and my livelihood, I've got to take the road with caution and to make sure that I'm not jeopardizing my livelihood. But I think that to not try at all would be the greatest crime. And I think that just doing something that in your heart is going to be a force of good in this world. Who cares about if it makes changes? Are you going to be a force of good, and are you going to stand up in the face of adversity, and are you going to say no? And I
No,
think that's
exactly.
and I think that's the mindset that we've just got to embrace. is that we may not have the answers, when and one on one we can't do enough. But if we have faith in each other, you know, and if we have faith that that the American experiment will continue, then all hope is not lost. And the last thing that I do want to say is that I think now more than ever is the time to take back some of our history from those who have tainted it. And I think that it's time that the people say, "Don't tread on me," to our king tyrant. You know, don't tread on me. Don't tread on my way of life. Don't tread on our democracy. Don't tread on our culture and our history. Because truly, no one man is above the law.
Right. No, and I think my message would be let let Tuesday be your glimpse of hope. That was democracy in practice. That
Hmm.
was a 3-3 Supreme Court. And if you don't live in Wisconsin, I guess it's not super impactful for your life, but Wisconsin's a US state, so I mean it has impact whether you know it or not. And that was democracy in hand. We saw the party that had more support go out there and win an election. And we saw Cory Booker go out there and halt the progress of MAGA to stand on his morals and let his constituents be heard.
Hmm.
And I think it's important to let those be glimpses of hope
Hmm.
because we're in such a dark time and we're seeing people being deported who are fully Americans and sent to concentration camps in Guantanamo Bay
Hmm.
or El Salvador, I guess wherever they're having it now.
Right.
But the point is, let that glimpse of hope motivate you to continue to get active into your local community. And like you said, for some people that looks different. And not everyone can go say fuck you to Westboro Baptist Church. But at the same time, like you said, the worst thing you can do is nothing and let that be your excuse to do nothing
Hmm.
because we can all do something. And in life, sometimes, like you said, again, I'm taking all your bars, but like you said, I mean, life isn't all about the the physical effects of what you do. It's also about the person you were, and can you look back at your life and say, I stood where I spoke. Because a lot of people, for instance, like to say, oh, if I was around during slavery, if I was around during the civil rights, it's like, you're showing right now. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
because we're seeing rights being pulled. We're seeing, the civil rights protections being pulled, your right to due process being pulled. We're seeing, separations of powers being pulled. And my final message, once again, is just let that be shown. Let Tuesday be shown as if we put in the work, if we do things right, and if we have passion with it, we can do it.
Yeah, most definitely. We just need to have faith and have conviction in each other and to not allow ourselves to be consumed by fear. You know, the words of Abraham Lincoln, divided we fall, united we stand.
100%. Bar. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate you having coming on today, Nolan. I think this was a really good pod. We talked a lot about some things that really matter. And I think getting into the morals of politics is a big deal. A lot of people don't like to talk about it. They'd rather stay on the issues like themselves and not get into beyond the issues. Because I mean, here we're trying to figure out like why things are the way they are, not just what they are.
Hmm.
And I think that's important as critical thinkers.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I just appreciate you like being able to do that with me because you know, I feel like we're getting to brain spaces that one, you know, no one can get to alone, but two, that can show people more and give people more insight into what's happening. And because guess what? Like, not a lot of people are like me and you, and just study
Hmm.
a lot of politics and government and labor and economics. But if we use our expertise, our energy, our faith, we're doing something. And it's not, perfect, but we're making a big step in the right direction.
I want to. I appreciate that, Carter. It means a lot. But I don't. But I think we need to take a moment to also like recognize you and your efforts. And one like providing the space. For us to even have these conversations. But is also like willing to provoke critical thinking. And is willing to go far and above and beyond. What our leaders are even expected to do. And I think that as long as we continue to use our voice and to project good in the world, then you know democracy dies with us.